Welcome, and thank you for coming. We're going to be talking today about tokenized governance, and before we get into that, let me introduce our guest. Jake, can you just say who you are, where when did you graduate Cal, and maybe what are you up to these days?
Sure. So, who am I is a really deep question. There's a great quote by Buckminster Fuller that I really love and try to live my life by. And it's, you never change things by fighting the existing system or the existing powers. You change things by creating a new system that replaces them. That's not exactly the exact quote, but you can Google it. It's a great quote. And so, yeah, I'm someone who's interested in building new things that replace the old things.
So what are you up to these days? I mean, what takes up most of your time these days?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot to answer your other question, which was like, when did I go to Berkeley? Yeah, I was at the iSchool in 2012 to 2014. That's where we met. And it was great. I was really into decentralized content distribution even back then. I was very upset with like Amazon and how they like just completely dominated the ebook market, and that poor authors had to give 30 to 60% of their digital book sales to Jeff Bezos for just shipping a file over the internet. And I was like, surely there must be a better way to cut out the middlemen so that, poor like sci-fi authors or just normal authors can get like the majority of, their proceeds for, And so I guess I've been interested in this stuff for a long time.
I forgot about that. But
yeah.
you had like an ebook standard or something so that you could self-publish an ebook without Amazon, right?
Yeah, we were working on like decentralized content distribution things, and we actually even mentioned cryptocurrency as a payment means in our final project paper, which you can still read. It's called Future Press.
This was like 2013?
This is 2013, 2014. Yeah. And we open sourced a library called EPUB.js, which is still used by a lot of companies actually. And it's an open source EPUB renderer. So
books would have been like 50 Bitcoin then? You would have been
probably
so wealthy if you had sold one book. Anyway.
Yeah, well,
so listen, I mean, we're here to talk about tokenized governance, so I think probably makes the most sense. Can you define for us, what is tokenized governance?
Sure. Well, I guess it gets into like what are tokens.
Sure, let's start with that. I mean, what's a token? I think many people have in our minds this idea of like Bitcoin, and there's this kind of idea of a coin or whatever, but I mean, at its fundamental, what is a token?
I think tokens are more than just coins. I'd say they're like a lot of people have been talking about them as a new primitive for the web. Like the first primitive we might have had is like the website, and I think tokens are analogous to a website. They can be used to create a bunch of different things. Like, sure, you can make tokens that function as currency. You can make tokens that function as like shares, like in a voting corporation. They're these little bits of data on a blockchain, and they can be, you can sort of encode whatever functionality you want into them. If you want to make them non-transferable, you can make them non-transferable. If you want to, give them like certain properties, like for example, I'm sure you've heard of like maybe NFTs, maybe you haven't, but
let's take a quick poll. First of all, I mean, maybe just familiarity-wise, raise your hand if you have ever used like a cryptocurrency or done like a transaction on with a cryptocurrency platform.
Whoa.
Okay, so like
Nice.
A lot of people here have. I think, for those of you who haven't, like raise your hand if you have heard of at least like Bitcoin or something similar. So, there's some ubiquity of understanding about this at least, and I think probably, from what even if you have only ever heard of Bitcoin, never actually done a Bitcoin transaction, you can digitally transact currency, I suppose, right? So how is a
Tokens.
token? Okay, you can digitally transact tokens. So why this differentiation between tokens and what many people would call like a cryptocurrency? Why draw this line? What is the difference?
Because I think again, like, tokens are just these things that are tradable, and we've heard a lot about NFTs. These are unique one-of-one tokens. usually have like an art or like an image or a song associated with them, and there's only one of them.
Okay.
And that unique supply is enforced by the blockchain.
I see. So that's different from a cryptocurrency.
I would say like, that's a token, but if there's only one of it, like it can't really function as like a currency.
Okay. So how do we use tokens for governance then? What does that mean? What does that look like?
Sure. So in a lot of DAOs right now, you have these like tokens, which are basically just voting shares in the DAO. And DAOs distribute these differently, and there's many different types of DAOs, and we can go into.
We should also probably say what a DAO is.
Oh yeah, sorry. If I get too much into lingo, please just stop me. A DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and you can think of it as like an organization that is not written in terms of legal documents, but is instead written in terms of code that it usually lives on a blockchain.
So there's an organization written in code, and I have shares in it, which are my tokens, effectively.
Yes, and so those tokens are sort of like the voting shares in this autonomous organization.
So let's say we make a DAO, right? Everyone in this room is part of this DAO, and we all have tokens, and we use those tokens to vote on what,
Great. So there's different types of DAOs with different types of purposes, but a lot of times the DAOs also have a shared treasury, for example. So maybe we've come into some funds for this new group we're starting, and we want to throw like a really cool party or something. And the funds are held by the DAO, and like people can vote on how those funds are spent. So I might make a proposal and say like, I want to do a really cool party at the faculty lounge. This is the budget. Please send me this much money from the DAO to my account so I can go out and buy these things.
So, just keeping this concrete, everyone in this room, we start a startup. Okay, so now we are all member of the startup, and we have a DAO that describes, I suppose, in some sense, our membership in this organization.
Sure, yeah.
Then you distribute, or I guess we collectively decide how to distribute these tokens among ourselves, and then you create a proposal to throw a party. And the proposal includes, I guess, if it were to pass, you get some tokens from the shared treasury, and you can use those to start your party. Is that kind of a work?
Yeah, maybe we can think of a better example. Are people lost? Like, nod your head if you're lost. It's a lot of lingo. But, okay, so DAOs can have shared resources, which is really cool. You can have a shared treasury, and again, that treasury is controlled by governance. Some DAOs actually do things. So I didn't talk about some of the projects that I'm working on, but one of them is called Stargaze, and we have content curation DAOs. So the way those work is if you're curating content that maybe gets listed on the front page of a website, people are using a DAO to vote on what content gets listed on the front page, or what artist gets to do a special event or whatever.
So it's a participatory way of running an organization that, and what you're describing with Stargaze, it reminds me somewhat, I suppose, of a news organization where instead of editorial control, it's a bit more democratic. Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting.
So imagine if you had a DAO-based news organization and all your journalists each had voting tokens, which represent their stake in the DAO, and then they could, rather than having an editor and this top-down hierarchical control, they could sort of have a more democratic process where they vote on what story gets on the front page.
So Stargaze enables this kind of use case, kind of organization?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, that's kind of curation, and so that's very much kind of what we're thinking about in terms of curation DAOs.
Interesting. So what's something you would imagine someone building with Stargaze? What's something that you would see that would make you feel, wow, this has really, really worked?
Yeah, well, Stargaze is very focused around NFTs right now. Mm-hmm. So we're having a lot of new artists that are coming to us with new NFT series ideas, and there's only so much like real estate for what should get promoted and stuff like that. So I think that's like a good use case for where like curation DAOs can really come in, and it's like, yeah, figuring out like what content should like be like editorialized or make it to the front page, things like that.
Okay. Cool. And we've also talked a little bit about, you're part of a organization called Juno. Can you tell us a little bit about Juno?
I'm one of the core developers of Juno Network.
Right.
It launched in October, And it's there's some people in the room that are actually like also working on Juno as well. And Juno is a general purpose smart contract blockchain. It's proof of stake, so very environmentally friendly. You can do about 10,000 transactions per second. It's 100% community launched. There were no VCs. There was no pre-sale or fundraise for Juno at all, which is really cool. And then people are building all sorts of really cool things on top of it. A lot of people in this room are working on something called DAO, which is a DAO that builds DAO tooling, which makes it really easy for you to go out there and make a DAO for whatever use case you might have in mind.
So I want to have you show us some DAOs in a second, but first, I kind of want to make a high-level observation, which is like, to my mind, right? It sounds like you work in tech. You are in some sense like a tech entrepreneur. You work at a tech company, and yet
there's not really a company.
There's no company. So I mean, are you employed by the DAO? I understand, for example, it's easy for me to understand that you are a member of this organization, but I mean, you're making a living this way. So can you kind of tell us more about this?
Sure. I mean, my situation is like complicated. We don't have to get into it because, like, so
I'm not the IRS. So, I'm more just curious about how you seem to be existing outside of these kind of like
I pay my taxes. Okay.
no doubt. Yes.
Taxes.
No. I mean, this is recorded. We all pay our taxes. But I think what I'm stuck with here, and not stuck on, but kind of stuck with, is that you are a fully functioning member of society. You are doing productive things, but you have no formal employment relation to any kind of legal entity that is known to the U.S. government or any other government for that.
Technically, I had to, for liability reasons, and we can maybe get into like the whole regulation thing. Is I do have like Public Awesome, which is like which represents like our core software development team, has an LLC.
I see. Okay.
And then I also have like a legal wrapper for myself, which I'm self-employed under.
Sure. I just wanted to kind of it's something I think about whenever I think about what you do. It's very unique, and I think maybe a model that will expand in a world of more flexible labor and stuff.
One of the really cool things about DAOs is that you aren't tied to like one corporation for like everything that you do.
Right.
Like a lot of times if you get a job at like Apple or some big tech company, they're gonna make you like sign some paper that says like all your creative ideas that you possibly have during the period that you're working under this contract all belong to us. They're all ours, and you can't work on anything else,
Yeah, and I should disclose also, I've been working on DAO a bit, and it is my first experience ever with DAO. Yeah, there is some conflict of interest with this, but I have nothing else, And I think, one of the things that stuck in my mind about this, as someone who's been formally employed in a way that actually very few people of my generation have been, just university, I'm like really a salary man.
Kind of log on and some like Gavin had messaged me.
And I'm like, oh, okay, do this, and then whatever else I do, it's kind of fine, and this seems to somehow work out. But it's really strange and bizarre, and I'm still getting used to it. But in the meantime, maybe it would be helpful if you could show us some DAOs and show us what it looks like.
Let's look at some of these things, and then maybe we can like talk a little bit more about like I think some of the really cool stuff that DAOs enables, different types of DAOs.
I got plenty more questions. Yeah.
Cool, sweet.
Yeah.
That's Wikipedia's definition of a DAO. Here's a DAO. This is a web app called Aragon DAO. It's not as cool as DAO, like what we're working on, because it's on the Ethereum blockchain, which is actually great. I love them, but I don't want to start fights. But this is a sort of a dashboard for your decentralized autonomous organization. We have a bunch of different sections. Like we have like a finance section. We can make a new payment. We can vote on stuff. And so if I can click vote, it's going to be slow. I hope I'm on the internet.
So what is this DAO? What do they do?
This DAO, I think, is for Aragon governance itself, which is like actually working on building this DAO tooling.
I see.
So
they're voting on how to build tooling for DAOs.
Mm-hmm. Or there might be like a developer or a designer that does some work or wants to do some work, and they want funds for that. Or like a whole team might make a proposal like, hey, this is a really great idea that we could like build and like integrate, and we want X amount to like get started.
While this loads, can I actually ask you a question that has come up between us before, which is, I think in a lot of people's minds, there's this idea that blockchains are environmentally disastrous. Can you speak to this a bit?
Yes. I think that for like the first generation of blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum as it currently exists. That's like a valid criticism. I would temper it though that like our current like whole capitalist system is incredibly environmentally destructive, and it's, while we can calculate how much energy something like Bitcoin uses, we can't say the same for our financial industry with all their skyscrapers and air-conditioned buildings and, you know, and the value they just extract from the third world. But yes, there's a whole modern generation of blockchains that are extremely energy efficient and can process thousands of transactions per second. The technologies that we build our chains with are, you know, you can run a node on a Raspberry Pi. That's like a, you know, $60 computer. That's a very, you know, very low compute, like that probably uses less than your phone charger does. And there's other modern chains like Avalanche Consensus, again, can process lots of transactions and run on very low power devices, which is really cool.
Why are people still using things like Bitcoin and Ethereum that use so much energy?
I think that, you know, it's just like the adoption cycle. You know, it takes a long time for like new things to come, and I think especially, you know, regulation plays a factor in this. Like Bitcoin's been around a while, so regulators think like they understand it, you know, whereas like these newer chains are like that are like smart contract based and stuff, like they don't get the same special legal status, and maybe they will eventually, but you know, that's a big factor. So.
Well, I assume that this is an older chain because it is not working.
This is Ethereum. It's a little bit slow, but let's keep going. This is a different voting interface. So this is actually on this is voting, like real voting on a decentralized exchange called Osmosis. We can get into what maybe that is later. But here, like in this DAO, people are making different proposals. Like in this first proposal, it's incentive adjustment model change. So what they're doing is there's a parameter on chain, and they're voting to change it, or they're voting to take an action.
So I have no idea what this means, but what I'm understanding is that there's some parameter here, and basically 52% of the DAO has turned out to, and 93% of them have voted to change this parameter on the network. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So that's like democratic governance of code that's running on the blockchain.
So it passed. So does that mean that automatically this is just changed on the?
That kind of gets to the autonomous part. Is like when these proposals pass and get executed, it's just automatically done.
So this is like a tech company that's running software, and the software is running, and then the token holders are voting democratically on how it runs and how to upgrade it effectively.
Yeah.
And those are binding once they pass.
Yeah, so if we scroll down enough, like people vote on things like software upgrades and stuff like that. So, so it's not just spending proposals, if that would be the point I'm trying to get across. Like here's like someone wants to start a marketing DAO. You know, someone's voting to add incentives to certain liquidity pools. Let's keep moving on. So this is a really cool project called Commonwealth, and they provide like a dashboard and sort of like forum for all these different DAO discussions. And they have a lot of different projects that are listed. We can just, I don't know what this project is, but we'll just, but yeah, like people like sort of like talk about various different proposals, and they have like, you know, big long discussions on them. And then you can actually vote through this UI as well. This is a really popular kind of like social DAO, and it's got a funny title, but it's basically this is kind of like a crypto culture group. It's called Friends with Benefits, and you like buy Friends with Benefits tokens, and you get access to the secret club, and they do a bunch of really cool things. I don't know. It's good to mention. This is called the Lao. It's a DAOs that like basically makes investments. So one of the types of DAOs that we've seen a lot of, I don't think it's the most interesting type of DAOs, but like investment DAOs where people can come together and they can like pool resources.
So the token holders in this collectively decide where to place their investments?
Correct. There's a lot of DAOs that actually support like open source infrastructure. So Gitcoin is one of them. Gitcoin is like a DAO that supports basically people to like build open source tooling, which is really cool. I didn't actually load it up beforehand, but I wanted to mention it. This is a very famous DAO called Moloch DAO. It has a terrible UI, but it's quite legendary. They like fund a lot of Ethereum open source development, for example, or Ethereum like core development. There are DAOs that like sort of operate as like worker collectives, or like sort of like dev shops or design shops. This is a dev shop one. It's called Raid Guild, and basically, they work together as a DAO to like take on jobs and stuff like that. And they use the DAO to like manage like internal reputation and like measure people's like contributions and stuff, which is really cool. And there's like other DAOs that are doing like design work and things like that. This DAO is really awesome. It's called Pleaser DAO, and the whole purpose of this DAO is to just collect art. So it's an art collection DAO. There's a lot of different kinds of DAOs, but this is kind of what they look like. A lot of times they have like like some pretty basic like web UI stuff. Like you can, if I can find a proposal that's open, I can like vote on something maybe. But yeah, that's like a quick tour of what some of these things look like. A lot of these things look like just like a web app, and you can open it up and you've got like a balance, and you can vote on stuff, and you can like see transaction history and stuff. Like I don't know if people are familiar, but there's these things called block explorers that like allow you to see like the history of everything that happened on the blockchain. And so one of the cool things about DAOs is there's a lot of transparency. When money is spent, we can see that it's spent. We can know exactly how much money the DAO has at all times. We can see exactly where everything goes. I think actually there's a lot to like about this for regulators. We don't need to get into that now, but so yeah, that's a quick tour of like different DAOs, yeah, like here we can see like a bunch of different members.
And this is how many shares they have in the DAO.
Yeah, so this one's like share based, and these are they have like sort of different tiers. Oh, actually, there's one more thing I want to show. I hope I spelled that right. So one of the really interesting things about DAOs is how they like handle assessing contributions. How do we like determine what people should get paid, especially when there's no like sort of management like kind of situation. So this is like a new DAO tool that came out recently called Coordinate, and basically it's like a way for people to like nominate other people in the DAO, and sort of like compensation is like determined by your peers. So like if you've ever had that situation where your manager who you just don't really get along with, but that person like determines your whole fate. And if that person's like, if you don't get along with that person, then you might not have that much future at a company. But the really cool thing is we can make systems where like contributions are judged by your peers. So this is a really cool tool that came out recently, and you sort of can like kind of vote, like you basically give them tokens, which like kind of represent like their allocation in that like sort of round. But yeah, I can show more about this later, but I mean, I could just stand in front of the screen all day, but we can probably just go back to talking about that.
Come on down.
Cool.
I've got
maybe this will like load someday. I don't know.
Sure. Thank you for this. This actually is really helpful to see. And I think what you've shown are mostly people who are working on software tools, but it strikes me that there's nothing about this intrinsically that necessitates it be about software. And I'm wondering, you can run a law firm this way if you wanted to?
Yeah, there's actually a law DAO that's like starting up right now.
So this does happen. So I think I'm wondering about. I have a friend who's a worker owner at a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And so what would you tell them, right? Like what is it? Why should they be interested in a DAO instead of this worker-owned California cooperative or whatever they're?
I would actually say that it's great that they have a cooperative, and that's awesome. Like, no, I mean like. It's like, I'm not sure for that particular use case that as things stand right now, that DAOs would be like really helpful for them, and it might just actually cause them like more of a headache. Because like ultimately a business like a coffee shop has to like interact with like the local government and like food and safety regulations and stuff like that. And so like the DAO is not gonna, like they're gonna need a legal entity anyway. Now, it could be fun for them to think about making a DAO on top of their coffee shop and cafe. And in fact, there's someone here who runs a lovely cafe called Atlas Cafe in the Mission. Wave your hand. And we're working to start a DAO on top of that and figuring out what that means.
Okay,
So.
I did not. I walked right into that one. I had no idea.
So I mean, you were mentioning, and I think that this is a really clear case for me, but let's say a law firm or even what you do with Stargaze, right? One of the examples that you have used with me in the past is that you can hire someone, so to speak, without having to worry about, H-1B or anything like that. So I mean, can you talk a little bit about what that looked like for Stargaze?
Yeah, so one of my co-founders is actually from Guatemala, and it's really cool. He's got an equal share in the company, or in the Stargaze DAO as we do.
Right.
And this is something I've seen multiple times in the crypto space that I wish was talked about more, is that in our normal colonialist kind of system that we live in, H-1Bs are used as a tool, they're basically used like indentured servitude. And if it doesn't matter how much you're contributing. If you're just born in the wrong country, you're not going to be compensated like your contributions might deserve.
No doubt. I think what I want to hold your feet to the fire to is more this. I understand. You gave your co-founder in Guatemala equal pay for equal work, and that's a fantastic thing. But how much of that has to do with DAOs intrinsically versus the norms that you're setting? And is it conceivable more or less that the same kind of corporate masters using now DAOs instead of Delaware C Corps will perpetuate the same colonial logics?
Yeah, I think that is a big risk, and that's why I would encourage all of you, especially the more left-wing radical people out in the crowd, get involved in DAOs and don't let them do that. It's like people have to get involved and make the future they want and organize to prevent such a thing. I don't think there's anything inherently in DAOs that protects against that, and so there is a lot to say for setting the right culture early on. But yeah, it's. I don't think there's anything inherently in DAOs that protects against that.
You're more concerned about setting defaults or setting norms.
Setting defaults, setting norms, building community. I do think that DAO or projects that are able to build community like that will actually be more competitive because they'll be able to attract the best talent. So,
Sure. Yeah, of course. Not to mention,
with Juno, one of our best contributors is from Peru, and he's done he's compensated according to his contribution,
right.
and not based on where he's from,
Right.
And that's why he's gonna stick with the project and keep contributing versus potentially go after some VC funded chain or whatever.
Right.
Right. It makes a lot of sense. I think as long as we're on the topic of community, I want to return to this question of curation and moderation in Stargaze. I just want to hear
Yeah.
I've never really heard you talk about this. How does this work?
These are really complicated, deep topics, which could probably just be a topic all in and of itself. But I guess we could talk a little bit. Yeah, this is going to be. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of deep questions about this because it's moderation is extremely difficult. In case you didn't know, it's really hard, and I think I would argue it's one of those things that's impossible to create a perfect system for. But what you can do is you can give communities tools to self-govern themselves and moderate their own content. So for example, say I want to create a social space around really cute puppy images, and I want to use the curation DAO. The curation DAO might have a certain amount of tokens, or it might have its own token. It might just create its own puppy token, which it gives out to people based on who has the cutest dog images or whatever. So it might be a UI that's Reddit or Instagram, where there's an upvote or there's a heart or whatever, and every time you click that button, you're sort of voting. But what about if someone uploads a dead puppy? We have to handle that situation.
It's an extreme example, but okay.
Well, I don't want that on
Sure.
the cute puppies page, and so we need to create a way for the community to resolve that issue.
So how does Reddit handle this?
Reddit handles this with like, I think actually, and it's maybe kind of like a precursor to like a DAO. It's not actually on chain, but they have elected moderators. People can flag content, and then that gets passed off to the moderators, and the moderators decide what to do about that.
Are the moderators paid?
Moderators are not paid. So they're just working for free to like enrich a big corporation.
Okay, right. Okay, that was going to be my follow-up question. So I mean, is Stargaze kind of challenging this model somewhat?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the
I think that people should get paid for their content. Like one of the cool things about DAOs is that we enable like new forms of collective ownership. Like, you know, imagine like Uber that's owned by its drivers. Like, or imagine a social network where like your content, like all y'all in this room, like it's your content and your data that makes Facebook valuable in the first place. But they just extract all that and they keep it for themselves. And you can create new types of systems with DAOs where like, you know, people are again sort of paid and rewarded for their contributions.
And that labor is both the production of content and the curation, moderation of content. So, you know, I mean, my observation here is that, you know, not even Reddit, but certainly Reddit is fundamentally kind of this rentier capitalist model, right? Where they arbitrage kind of what you're willing to do and what they can make off of your
People
content.
spend hours on, like moderators spend like hours and hours every day, like, you know, with these communities. And even like, you know, like the average person probably spends, I think curation is work. All the time you spend going through your feed and you like retweet the good stuff or you like stuff, like you're doing work.
Absolutely. I spent an unpleasant amount of work yesterday trying to curate my Twitter because it was just it is a hell site. Objectively, it is a hell site. And it was really bothering me, and I had to go through and unfollow people, and then went back to my Twitter, and it was still bad, basically. And, you know,
Yeah.
I would wish I would pay someone, basically, to make this better for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so I want to move over to Q&A, but I have some kind of like rapid fire questions for you. And I'm going to ask that this be kind of a game where you give kind of a yes, no, or I'm not sure, and just simply don't elaborate any further.
Awesome.
Okay. So I have a lab at Berkeley. Should my lab be a DAO?
Hell yeah.
Okay. So my lab is within the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. Should CLTC be a DAO?
Yes.
Okay. Our CLTC is within UC Berkeley. I mean, should UC Berkeley be a DAO?
Yes.
Okay. What about the UC system?
Yes.
Okay. How about the municipality of Berkeley?
Yes.
Okay. And then the California state?
I think that would be nice.
Okay. And the US federal government?
Maybe someday.
Okay. All right. Very well. Then with that, let's move on to Q&A. So I guess, you know, if you have a question, just raise your hand and let's go for it.
I've got a two-part question.
All right.
So the first part is around global governance, and I think where Nick was going with this in his hierarchy, I want to keep going up.
Cool.
So global governance is fucked right now, so we can't make collective decisions. Climate change is a big indicator of what's happening to our planet. Do you think DAOs and crypto economics in general and the services that can be built on blockchains can affect this in some ways? And then just following that, my part two question is around...
I'll already followed up, but I'd say they have to, because I just fundamentally don't believe that our boomer institutions are going to be able to solve climate change in time. That there's no way that, like you said, there's no way we're going to like have suddenly like a meaningful system of global governance that's going to be able to like get everyone to coordinate in the way that is needed to actually meaningfully address climate change. And so we need other ways of collaboration in order to solve these problems. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, you can ask part two of your question, I don't know. But.
I guess I'll go to part 1A then.
Okay.
Can you give us, just some sweet examples of how that might play out?
Sure. I think part of the, challenges of something like creating like meaningful like legislation around like climate change is it's such a global problem. And so like, you might have people with capital that want to like buy like carbon offsets, for example. I think we need a lot more than just carbon offsets. But like you might have people with capital in America that want to buy carbon offsets. But you need like people like in Brazil or in like Peru to be like reforesting like areas of the rainforest and make sure that that is like, you know, actually being done, that it's not just like, you know, like made up stuff. Like it has to be verified. And if you try to do this with like legal agreements, again, it's going to take like, you know, 5 years, and then it's like agreements between different countries. And yeah, you actually might know more about this than I do, but there's some cool projects that are like trying to tackle these like kind of ideas of like markets for ecological services. One of them is called Regen Network, which I really recommend people check out. There's quite a few more as well. I think honestly, this is like the kind of topic that I think needs like honestly its own talk series, and like getting a bunch of ideas together around, yeah, how we can create, you know, new incentives for these types of things. But
thank you. And then quickly, part 2 is, can you see or can you address the question of sort of not perpetuating hyper-capitalism through DAOs in a way, because power is money and power is equal to money is equal to voting powers in this case?
Yeah, so I think that's why it's important that we need to get more diverse people active in these kind of conversations and not just have people sit on the sidelines. You know, I think also that like money is just like fundamental to life. And I think that there's a lot of like, I think very well-to-do like radical people that just try to pretend like, you know, like money is not there. They think it's kind of dirty because they grew up as trust fund kids, and you know, they just don't want to talk about money. But I think, you know, if you look at like all like the really big theorists are like, you know, money is like the fundamental protocol of life, and or like it's currently the fundamental protocol of society. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but you know, the most powerful thing I think activists can do is really take advantage of that fact and create new systems of money.
Totally capitalist system to address environmental problems, we'd probably get the world that we currently have today. Can you imagine a DAO around like pain or blood, or even, you know, or human suffering in some respects, and then would that create a perverse incentive for DAOs?
You're gonna have to elaborate on what you mean about a DAO for blood, but.
Mafia DAO. I mean, I guess I want to know what you guys think. But you know, if you think about like if currency is kind of like a central orbiting element for the way the world rotates today, perhaps a blood of pain or suffering oriented DAO would be more like I don't know. It would maybe turn into like a moralistic economy to some degree. Perhaps it would be a critique on the current kind of like resource and consumption economy. And then also I'm thinking about it in terms of like the way the healthcare system is organized, with the perverse incentive today where you know, there's more profit to be made by more people being sick.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how to respond to this, but I will like kind of reiterate something I said earlier, which is that, you know, I don't think that there's like, you know, DAOs are tools. There's nothing like inherently in them that like would prevent, you know, such a thing. But you know, there's but there's nothing that says they'll also have to be. I'm still not sure what the blood DAO is, but it sounds scary and it sounds bad. So you know, hopefully we can avoid it.
Question. I'm struggling with the DAOs. Are they always, in terms of understanding if they're being fueled by cryptocurrencies or by tokens, and if they're being like, and maybe the higher level is being very confused about NFTs in general, and if they're singular ones, like when that market stops, and are you on a DAO trading NFTs, or are you like, yeah, just maybe help clarify.
So the question's about clarity around NFTs.
NFTs and whether or not like the DAOs are being fueled from a currency basis, like are you being paid?
I can actually help answer this because I was very confused about this for a lot of the time when I was trying to figure out what was going on with Jake's life. And here's what I recently figured out. So these tokens are somewhat fungible with other tokens in this ecosystem. So in that sense, yes, the money is kind of sloshing around, finding its way from I would say larger crypto, and Jake will have a chance to rebut this characterization. This is how I currently understand it. So from some of these larger cryptocurrencies, there is money kind of, I think, flowing out for a variety of reasons, some of which being that these are structurally unsound, make no sense, the transaction fees are too high, blah, 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 blah. And so the exchangeability of these tokens with those more defined currencies that can be exchanged for fiat currencies is, I believe, what gives these tokens something that you might call a fundamental value, if that helps to answer your question.
Just to be very clear, let's say there's a Kepler token, and what you're saying is that 10 Keplers could be traded for a Bitcoin.
In some sense, yeah, sure. Okay. Right, and then these exchange rates are somehow found like on open markets, I believe, as people value the things that these DAOs do in different ways. Now I'll let Jake explain. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the great things about tokens is that they can just be easily exchanged, and that there's actually these things called automated market makers, which 10,000 years ago in the barter system, if I had a chicken and you had a bunch of rocks, and you really wanted a chicken and I did not want your rocks, that'd be done. There's no trade. The thing with tokens is they're just kind of like these almost like perfectly tradable things. Like there's like a market for like almost every token, and so you could trade your rocks for something else and then trade that for something else, like all in like one transaction, and then seamlessly trade whatever I wanted and would accept for for my chicken.
So meaning as more and more organizations become DAOs, and in your dream world, everything, a lot of things are DAOs. Is that also an infinite number of tokens, or do you see that the number of tokens are going to become similar to?
I think there'll definitely be tokens that are have much bigger market caps than others. I think that there's definitely going to be a power law there. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a USD stable coin, or some government stable coin, or those kinds of things. Or I wouldn't be surprised if there's something that's really popular, like Ethereum, for example, that kind of serves as that reserve asset that a lot of people kind of exchange between. But yeah, I do see a very long tail of tokens. And in terms of the NFT market, I think you were kind of talking about that. I do think it's there's hype cycles in this industry. I think NFTs are not going away. I think they're actually really incredibly cool, and we can do a lot of amazing things with them that you just cannot do. But I do think they're probably overhyped right now. So you have to sometimes see through all the noise that crypto as an industry creates. I actually prefer the bear markets when the price is down, and then because the problem is when it gets really speculative, it just attracts all the worst people, and then none of the good narratives actually get through. But it's way better when the price is down.
So we should buy Martha Stewart's NFT.
I mean, you can do whatever you want. You could make your own NFT series for whatever, a cause you want or something like that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Question.
Right.
So for a physical DAO, like UC Berkeley or let's say a cafe.
Yeah.
When you have, can you make different types of tokens where they get different types of voting? Let me elaborate on that.
Yep.
So if you have UC Berkeley and you make it international, worldwide voting into certain classes, blah, 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 but then you want to vote into should there be a restaurant here or should there be a cafe here, I don't think the global world is really from that.
Yeah, no, you bring up a very good point in that it's great to have tools for these very big, whole group decisions. But at the same time, we also can't just vote on everything all the time. Then we would just be spending all of our time voting. And so it's important to be able to delegate teams to teams or whatever. So in DAO, which is the DAO tooling we're working on, you can set up what's called a multisig contract. So you can think of that as just a group of people that have a budget assigned to them, and they can choose what to do with that budget. So for example, you might have a core group at Atlas DAO that's in charge of renovating the bathroom, and they're going to make a proposal to be we're the 3 people that are going to do this task. We want this much budget to do the task. And then the DAO votes to like assign you that budget, and then you make all the little microtransactions like, oh, we need to pay this contractor, we need to pay that contractor, and then the whole DAO doesn't have to end. I think an important thing to remember about DAOs is these are just organizations that are written in code, and so that's very, very broad. We can create many, many different types of corporation or organizations. If people really wanted to, perfectly replicate, the existing like boomer corporate structure, they can totally do that, and have like a role-based system where like the CEO is like, so you can do those kind of things, but.
I think a DAO for the cafe makes perfect sense because ultimately as anyone who owns a business, a service business, you really ultimately want to hear what the customer says.
Yeah, and then also like how do you like reward people? Like people have these loyalty points programs kind of things, but then that's another problem of like I have like I might get tons of Starbucks points. Like I hate Starbucks, but I might get tons of Starbucks points, but there's no way for me to exchange those points for like anything else.
I'm not quite sure I know how to articulate the question that I have, but I think it has to do, Jake, in a crypto economy, and there's these DAOs. Like, is there a good example you could share of what I would call traditional philanthropy? Like people organizing to give money.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean,
social change.
Yeah, exactly. So these might be causes like that are like near and dear to like the heart of many people that work in crypto, but Gitcoin. Which is, or GitDAO is like an example I brought up earlier. That is all funded by people donating to like funds like open source development. So it's entirely like donation based. So like people that benefit from open source software, like and they've raised millions and millions of dollars. There are DAOs that are like there's one that had like a pretty, kind of rough launch recently, but ClimateDAO is like trying to do stuff related to like environmental action. There's like people that are making DAOs for like legal organizations to again like sort of figure out some of the regulation questions around the space, which are holding many things back. It's holding back maybe like CLTC from becoming a DAO, or that's like different discussion, but like until there's like clarity around this thing. So like people are donating towards like legal campaigns. So yeah, I think there is a culture of philanthropy. It's just not based around like the tax deduction like kind of scheme that rich people in America love. So it's there. It's very much there. Like Moloch DAO, which I showed earlier, was one of like the early like kind of examples of this. Of like, there's DAOs that are supporting like women programmers and disadvantaged people to like give them like opportunities for like learning and education, or to like help them like launch an NFT artist series or whatever.
How much has Moloch DAO given away?
Millions of dollars. I don't know. Also like what's the value of what they've given away now that Ethereum is like over $4,000? It's probably a lot, but. So, and like another example is like many of these organizations have DAOs. So like there's an exchange called Uniswap, and Uniswap is a decentralized exchange, and anyone can make a proposal to Uniswap. So like Harvard, like a group at Harvard made a decentralized finance education fund proposal, and they got $20 million to like support a bunch of researchers to go and research DeFi and like figure out like what's a sensible way to like regulate these kinds of things and stuff like that. So there is that angle. Like these DAOs themselves have like tokens and resources, and anyone can like go and make a proposal, and if the DAO votes on it, then they're good. So I don't know. We'll get to people's questions, but.
My questions are around sort of forming the DAO. I guess there's like two parts to this. I worked at a DeFi company before, so that's what I'm most used to,
Cool.
sort of DeFi protocol DAOs. In the beginning, it's usually centralized. The core team, maybe the investors, mostly control what's going to be developed as they're sort of figuring out, how to make it, grow, like figure out and provide guidance in the beginning. When
is it, how do you get towards decentralization? Like at what point, like how many users is a good time to be like, okay, we're really gonna start to give it up and like spread it, spread the power out. So we're gonna lose control over this. And then one thing that I saw is like as the DAO kind of grows, especially like with MakerDAO's case, and there's like a lot of people voting. I sort of saw this thing where like the votes tend towards short-termism and profit for the holders. So whether it's like 10 people in the boardroom doing it, or 30,000 people who's incentivized mainly by profit and financially preserving their gains, sort of repeats the same problem that we had. So how do we get around to creating a public movement? I get that if it's not for DeFi or finance, it might be different. But is it all just goodwill? But it's all open, so anyone can sort of come and ruin it, right? Anyone with a lot of money could theoretically come and just ruin the entire protocol once it's decentralized. So how do you grow it?
No, that's great. That's a really great question, really great commentary. I'll take the first part first. Is like I think how best to like the quintessential question is like how to distribute these voting tokens. That's really it at the end of the day. Like you can have a DAO where it's only like membership based, and it's like one token per one individual, and you never mint more tokens so that they can't be like traded on a market. And then I guess you have to then worry about like maybe someone coming in and like bribing someone, but like really that's never going to go away. So there are those kinds of things. In the smart contracts, you can also do things like make tokens non-transferable. So it's very much up to like the group's decision of like whether they want to like trade their tokens on public markets, even or on decentralized exchanges. And I think that different DAOs will make different decisions with regard to that very question. There are things to be like advantages to trading your token on a public market. For example, it can help with fundraising, and fundraising is a realistic activity that a lot of groups like really need to do. So I think there's not easy answers to these questions, and the answer is always going to be it depends. And in terms of like how we can prevent like bad actors. We already live in a world where there's a lot of bad actors, and we already live in a capitalist hellscape. So it's like we just have to like go out and try and make something better to the best of our ability. And like it might be impossible to completely prevent like all bad actors from entering the system, but we need to create systems that are reliable against that threat model. And I think the best way to do that is like through like sort of digital cooperatives and like sort of these like kind of collectivist like movements. I do think that you brought up the example of MakerDAO, and I think that's a really great example. And I think decentralized finance definitely attracts like a certain type of like person, and I think that other types of DAOs, whether they're like art DAOs or like curation DAOs or sort of like research DAOs or like those will attract different types of people. But at the end of the day, I think your question comes down to, I think, a really important topic that if you're a sociology person, like this is like really needs to be studied, or like even a political science person, like how do you like bootstrap a DAO? Like how do you handle that token distribution? It's really like the key question, because that like determines so much, and it varies depending on the goals of the DAO. Like if you have to raise funds, well then someone's going to give you money and they're going to expect some like voting tokens in return, so like I think that those are huge areas that really frankly need to be explored and written about and like thought seriously about for like all the different trade-offs. That was an amazing question though. Thank you.
All right. You kind of answered my big question already, but I'll give you a smaller one. Since everything's happening on chain, does that mean that people can see who voted for what?
Yes, though this is actually a really great argument for like privacy chains, and you could probably make like a smart contract that's like a mixer that could like potentially hide such things. But yes, in current DAO implementations, you can see which address voted for what. Now, granted, this is not necessarily connected to like a human identity, so I just see an address, a cryptographic address. That doesn't mean I know it's you, so it's pseudonymous.
But you kind of know.
But you kind of know, yeah. Though you could create, systems where Like we're actually working on this with Stargaze to like hide the votes because I think it's like an extremely important thing.
Well, listen, Jake, you do something and live a life that is unlike anyone else I know. You have introduced me to this world, and seeing you do this and make this happen has been amazing. Thank you for coming and sharing that in front of an audience. I gained a lot from this. I hope you all gained a lot from this. And even if you didn't, there are drinks outside. So we'll see you all outside for a second.
Go join a DAO. Go out. Go collectively organize. It's going to be awesome.